Welcome back. Welcome back to Virtual VSC. I have no idea what week this is, but I know that we are still going. Today we have Daniel talking with, a few days ago, Daniel spoke with Dove Drury, who was a fellow here, a teaching fellow, who worked in the elementary school with Arista Alanis, and Dove has some really, really cool things to say about art education and also about their own practice, which is awesome, which is really exciting to hear. So, you two ready?
So, hey, Dove.
Hi, Daniel.
It's really good to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me to talk.
I'd like to give you a platform. Not that I think you need too much of one to stand on.
It's rewarding to feel like Vermont Studio Center's now, like to have been there for 2 months, to have like really gotten developed into the culture there and to engage more intimately with you and the other folks who work there. It feels like a place now in my mind that's very like solid, and then I can come back to either conceptually or hopefully, one day when we go outside again.
Yeah. So I think we want to talk about maybe like some of the work that you did while you were here. So you were here as a teaching fellow. What was it like to put together kind of a curriculum to really like embed a lot of your lens, I guess, in creative practice into translating that into working with children?
Maybe I can start even like many, many years ago. I'm the middle child of 5 kids, and so I in part helped raise my 2 younger siblings. Having that kind of breadth of children in one's life, especially when one is younger and also a child or a teenager, it's, we had family friends with a lot of kids, or birthday parties were stacked together, or there was always this kind of like a big kind of social unit engaged environment with my family generally. As an artist, for me growing up and getting closer to what I experienced as a child, for better and worse, and the kind of reflection on that especially that I put emphasis on over the past few years, I have a lot of reverence for children and their unique perspective and their ability to be so fresh and to not perhaps be so indoctrinated with the kind of violences or politicized draconian policies that we know more intimately or experience intimately as adults. So a few years ago, I was living in New York and I was working at a sort of an after-school arts program called the Ashcan School of Arts. It was based in New York and Long Island, New York City. I was working with teenagers there, and that gave me more experience as to how to, just at the classroom, especially working with younger kids or teenagers, people, that it's very important to see them as people, I think. We all have professional boundaries and certain kinds of discourse and policies which are important that we need to follow for people's safety and general well-being. But I think it's especially relevant. I mean, teenagers and kids, they've grown up online and have this very intimate, connected world with technology, and the filter or the kind of like social dialogue. Like, I've met a lot of kids, children, younger people who they do kind of read like adults, or they have this sense of knowing a little bit more. And so I think it's very important not to doubt children and their level of intuition and that kind of sense of being able to, maybe even you can remember as a child, like being able to like read the room or call out someone's bullshit. And, that some adult is just lying for the sake of convenience to your face. Maybe we get a little bit more, or perhaps less attuned to that condition as adults. But so anyway, so I think that working as an artist right now, I work at the Oxford School of Art, and I'm the ceramic studio manager there. And for that, I have about like 10 plus years of going through a BFA and an MFA, and then working at Ashcan School of Arts, and then now I'm at Oxbow. So this level of like engagement within the arts and arts communities and learning communities with that kind of intention is my area of specialty and experience. So to bring my world into, to be, very fortunately invited to bring my world into Vermont Studio Center, and then also working with children 5 through 11, 6 through 11, which is an age bracket I haven't worked with before in the classroom. It was just felt like a really great opportunity for me to, really learn how to be in the classroom like that, to learn from students, to see how they engage, and to bring many ideas that I collaborated on and executed successfully with Arista. And so just building up this quality of what it means to put oneself in the classroom. And the program, the teaching fellowship, is so great because it's just like it's kind of a crash course, and it's sort of a bubble, and it just felt very safe. And Risa and we got along really well, and she helped me to break down a lot of my ideas and to create very like formalized and functional assignments for the duration of the 2 months with the students. That kind of structuring was really helpful to experience and then to go through and to, bring with me afterward.
Yeah. And it was still very ambitious, I think. I love seeing the work that comes out of that elementary school. But I think it was like an ambitious body of work and like projects that came through our kiln,
Yeah, I wanted the projects to be a bit ambitious, but also manageable. But they referenced art history, and for instance, there was French scientist named Bernard Palissy who collaborated with a ceramic studio in France in the 1600s, and he would collect all these specimens and bugs and insects and things, and then he would make molds of them, and he would put them on these, with the collaboration of the ceramic production house. They would kind of create these plates, these platters of molds that were cast from these specimens. And so kind of like this ecological localized survey. And so I brought that idea to the kids and asked them, and said, we can't kind of go outside and collect things and make mold because of our time limit, although I think that would be a great project. Instead sort of utilizing their likes and their autobiography to make objects and shapes and to reference their own interests. And so to make those the objects that they put on these platters. So on one hand, there was a kind of a registration of hand building techniques, as hand building is my specialty in ceramics, and then also to engage with their personhood, their agency. And I would speak about this a lot in the classroom as we were going through the projects, which I think is important, to just let kids know that they can, their lives are important and varied and nuanced, and they have their own interests and desires, and why not kind of showcase that within this opportunity?
That's so important. Okay, so let's move into like your work then, because you mentioned hand building is your, I don't know if you said expertise, your specialty.
It's the world that I engage with most, and at Oxbow I provide people instruction on how to accomplish certain projects. So it's what I know and what I can share.
So what I love about how you've talked, I guess, about hand building in the resident presentations that I saw of yours, I love that you talked about it kind of as performance.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know, I'd love to hear you, kind of recap that idea, because this idea of performance in object building is definitely something I've returned to multiple times, I guess, in my practice. But to hear someone else kind of express that and then to look at the work and really see that, I think was is really nice.
Thank you. I think that's a really great question, and it is very relevant to my making practice. When I was an undergrad, I finished my undergraduate at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I was taking a lot of painting and performance classes there before I found ceramics, which is where I first started to engage in that material. And painting, it just didn't feel like it was giving me that kind of sensual experience that I needed. And I just didn't want to just engage through the visual. I mean, lots of paintings, they engage us physically or physiologically or have a kind of a tactility or a sensorial quality which is very psychic. But I guess I was yearning for a material or a process that felt more embodied. And I think in that desire for embodiment that there's kind of from my experience, that there was a desire of knowing myself more and being able to investigate an inner world that I could express, embody that expression through an exterior form. So when I kind of just stumbled into a ceramics class, I liked what the glazes were doing, things that I felt like I couldn't really get with paint. Fortunately, at SAIC, there was a lot of resource for clay and glaze, and so I'm very grateful for SAIC that they provided that particular kind of paradigm, because it allowed me to play a lot and to make a lot. And I made a lot of forms that were very kind of like discrete little bits and pieces that eventually became larger objects. And so the repetition of making is kind of like a performance, your own sort of factory, or that you get into a certain physical kind of rhythm. I love dancing, and I've discovered, I think, through ceramics and also through more in-depth personal investigation, that having this kind of nuanced or expressive physical relationship with my body really helps me feel more alive or human or planted, grounded, and more confident, I would say. So the work that I was making at Vermont Studio Center during the fellowship, they're based in the vessel. They're based in a kind of repetition. They're definitely based in movement of my body. They're vessels that are coil built, and each coil I would say that there's a kind of choreography or a rhythm of how I'm touching and moving and expressing through the clay, and that rhythm creates a kind of a texture. And so they've been referenced. People have said they're sort of like textiles. In textile, it's like a woven or a crocheted textile. It has a kind of pattern through the making. And you and I could make a little like thumb pinch bowl, right? And they would have maybe they would look similar-ish, but they have their unique structure, and that's based upon experience, but also I think based upon a physiological relationship with the material. And that intimate connection, I think, is really important, because it showcases a kind of the unique qualities that our body, it's the sort of our pulsating energy that can be expressed in material. And I think to just kind of acknowledge that sort of energy is to acknowledge our own lives and what we can do. And I mean, it's a very simple, humble little pinch pot bowl in that sense of the form, but for me, it showcases a lot of, I don't know, just what it means to have a life and to have the ability to express ourselves, which is kind of like freedom, The performative quality of making, for me, I think helps me to express a kind of inner freedom. Like when I'm in the studio late at night and I'm kind of dancing, or I'm listening to music in my headphones, or I don't know, a kind of sassy joy that comes out, and I feel like that kind of joy goes into the work.
I kind of see that, and I think it was interesting to see the work being developed in your studio before hearing that, and just having that be put together. And also, I've never really experienced kind of like the finished work, which is something I'm realizing a lot lately, is how much I have to focus on that here, is I'm seeing the work in progress some people definitely set it up like, it's a gallery show at the end, but like with glazes and stuff, I'm sure that completely changes everything. And with ceramics, there's definitely that like sense of pause and transition of material and having to work with the material in its time and firing and refiring. That aspect of performance in the making of the vessel, and I guess maybe also in performance in the sense of you do performances also.
Right.
When you see the final product, when it's fully realized or whatever that means, but it transitions beyond that performance.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a sense of memory of that performance that's still there, or?
I mean, I like that kind of atmospheric way of describing it. I think I'm also hearing you a little bit talk about the sense of control or giving up control, or when something is finished. Is the performance finished when the performer walks off the stage, or etc., or is it, is the performance finished when it's forgotten in your mind, or when in terms of engagements, that's something I'm thinking about a lot, because I do make these. I think that there is a relevance of intimacy and actually a physical connection, seeing the work in person. I think that this is a broader question for artists about social media and making work for social media, or making work for the Instagram square, and what gets photographed well and what doesn't. I think in my experience, glazes, they're so luscious up close and they can get a bit flattened being posted online, and I'm sure painters and other artists have similar conundrums. I'm seeing a lot of work right now that, in terms of glazing, that's very sort of robust and eruptive, and like layers upon layers of glazes. And so there's this very graphic quality to the way that some ceramicists, maybe a kind of contemporary school of ceramicists, are sort of utilizing that particular material. Whether that's conscious or subconscious or intuitive or market driven, that's probably each to their own. But in a way, that kind of sense of like the performance of the work, or the memory of the performance, the way I glaze, I like the kind of atmospheric firings like in gas kilns. And so there's a sense of drippy, dancey, splattery glazing. I like that energy to be in there. And then to put that kind of energy into the gas kiln, which has more of a, changes the body a bit, changes glazes drip more, colors change. For me, I need that sense of letting go. I have faith that the process is going to give me a greater result than my immediate mind. So there's this thing in ceramics with like the kiln gods, and you do a little prayer, and there's the whole kind of ritual of it. And I like that the physical structure keeps the memory. And also I can, on top of that memory, I can have a kind of atmospheric, more spontaneous kind of quality on top of that. So I think those two things, they interest me a lot. And sometimes I think the work could exist just on its own without a lot of glazing, without maybe noise. Sometimes I think glazing can be just noisy and maybe not essential. And I think the more I make work, the more I'm kind of wanting to ask, like, what is the essential thing, or like, what's the most important thing? Or, if I do want to make work that is for, especially for an encounter that is in person, like, then I want it to be like an exquisite counter. I want it to be like, it doesn't need to be Baroque, or it doesn't need to be like full of detail, but I would just like it to make exquisite, especially in person.
Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about the idea of collaboration almost, and I remember you speaking of one of your videos in kind of this spontaneous collaboration that took form with someone singing.
Oh, yeah.
And there's some planned collaboration in there, right? Because you're using someone else's body within that. But I love the idea of like object collaboration, and being smart about like the tools or the people you're working with, because so much of that is you giving up some ownership to them, to that kiln. That's a really nice pairing, at least in how I'm thinking about collaboration within your work.
I mean, we're all kind of in indebted to the work and the labor and the technology and lineages of craft or thought, like life energy of artists and craftspeople and the myriad anonymous craftspeople of the past who have made work that inspires us and makes us feel like we want to contribute in a similar way. The myth of the lone singular like white male genius is gone. It's antiquitous, I think. I would hope. And collaboration, it's not only, I think, inherent to everything we do. I mean, I didn't make most of my clothes. I just bought the food I ate today. I didn't grow it, and so collaboration also seems, it's essential, I think, to the survival of humans going forward in the future. I think that there's politicized boundaries and borders. Artists are inherently a part of the political planet everyone is, and I think that collaboration is what makes us human. It's what, I think if we were supposed to just be by ourselves, we would probably just, there's probably an alternate universe where we're totally fine alone on a planet and we can do whatever we need to do.
Kind of what we're doing right now.
A little bit, but we're not. And maybe speaking back to my upbringing or the kind of places that I'm fortunate to work, they are very collaborative, community-based places. And for me, the social energy is something that I really need to, artists, we need our kind of alone time and our studio time and all that kind of stuff. But I just recognize that I need to be around other people who are making and other people who have similar conversations going on in their heads, or who desire this social landscape, because there is this kind of underlying knowledge that we all need to help each other in order to grow. And in my studio practice right now, I love the kind of singular discrete object. At times I do question the value of making objects, maybe rather than experiential. I mean, the objects, of course, have great experiential qualities within them, but sometimes I've thought about, okay, so ceramics to me, like part of the reason why I think I've really fallen for ceramics is because it has this sort of utilitarian quality to it. It can be anything generally, and so you can sip out of a bowl from 1,000 years ago or something. And so when I first got to Vermont Studio Center, I was kind of struggling with what I should make. Should I be making ceramics? Is that what I want to do? Should I be working on just research, or even thought about other kind of textile-based work that could be worn or engaged with in other kinds of ways? And so sometimes I feel like, and maybe it's a healthy thing to question, is the kind of echo chamber of making. What kind of audience, or is there an audience, or is that a priority? Or, what is in the kind of classic art school question, like, what's at stake? Why continue? I mean, I think at times it can be very detrimental to ask too many questions, especially in the middle of a process, and to doubt ourselves. I think that there is a quality just moving forward, but also having the space and time, which is such a luxury, especially for an artist at Vermont Studio Center, it did give me a little bit of an important amount of time to say, like, is this really what I want to do? Is this what I'm going to focus my energy on? Is this what I'm going to prioritize? Because I want to engage in my work like 100% more so. And so when I really go into a project, I want to be there completely. And having that little bit of a shadow of doubt in my mind, I think when I eventually got into the work I made at Vermont Studio Center, it provided me that bit of fire, or that acknowledgement of, like, yes, this is what I want to do. I was very grateful that people were very receptive of the work I was making there, the other residents, and that developed relationships and conversations. And so the work, object making and the work itself, it's always a tool for communication, or to describe ideas, or to share some kind of intuitive connection to beauty. And I think that if there's a if there's a strong acknowledgement or an intuitive pull when one is making objects or any kind of work, then I think that that is something to really follow, and that's going to be able to be felt and expressed by other people who are engaging in the work, whether it's in person or on social media.
I think it's super interesting to just have the space to investigate a vessel, or like, what is that what I'm making? Is that what I want to make? I think this, we could have had a conversation about like queerness, like, and how that is being performed in objects, but like I don't want to put that on show for sure. It's just it's like whatever, objects are performative, but like to investigate the idea of the vessel itself.
Totally. I mean, the vessel is the body. It completely signals our own relationship with the world as a meaty, weird container of water and electricity and ideas and desires. The vessel as this kind of queer signaling, part of the performative expression of my queerness is through fashion and clothing and different ways of engaging with the ornamentation of the body. And that playfulness or that subversion or that gendering or deconstructing of gendering or reimagining of gender is something that something that I take very seriously and I think a lot about, but I also want it to still be joyful. And so the vessel and my research, the myriad firings I've done to get certain types of glaze results. For me, that kind of performativity of a exterior relationship to the vessel that I'm making out of clay with the glaze and research into glaze, I think that there's a relationship in terms of expression of in debt to, or like that I feel like it's necessary, or that it's like it's not valid unless it's glazed or something. But that glaze as a way to express a kind of, it can be sloppy, it can be atmospheric, it can be unpredictable, it can be spontaneous, it can be a bit harsh, a bit gnarly. I like glazes that have some kind of texture, that speak to a playfulness, that there's definitely a embedded kind of queerness within that.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the language you're using to describe it, I think is, the language you wake up and you're like, how is it that I want to perform myself today?
That's a good comment as well, because it's a choice, and if one has the privilege or the blessing or the agency or the freedom of that choice, then one should really use it and really go for it. And jeans and a t-shirt they're always going to be there, right? Like, or like a suit or something. So of course I wear sweatpants, and there's all these kind of creature comforts and utilitarian things that I have that I like to wear. And then there's the kind of wake up every day and think about, oh well, like even if I'm going to the bank or the grocery store, well, what can I pull out of that? And it is a certain kind of quality of engaging with life and having a sense of humor. And I think about the relationships that I have with my clothing also as kind of, formal compositional concerns with color and pattern and texture. And so these things they come through my painting, and they come through working with ceramics. And so it's not to say that one puts something down. I think that there's just multiple forms to express similar ideas.
I love the conversation, but I do not just want to put you on, but I do think it is, part of the conversation.
I'm totally happy to have the queerness be upfront. I mean, I think that those are great questions, and those are things that swirl around in my head a lot, but I don't typically get the opportunity to talk about that. So I am super happy to have that included.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. This piece you're doing, that's like it's like a disc, and then you're casting against it. I think that's actually like a really it could be maybe an interesting transition in this idea of like collaboration, or because now you're kind of like working outside of the kiln and instead having to rely on other people for that collaborative aspect of this, and the fact that it's like larger than your body can physically manage.
Right.
Is that like a new kind of breaking a parameter for you, I guess, larger than your body?
Yeah, that's definitely something that that's a parameter that I've wanted to, plenty of desires with scale and collaboration and the kind of choreography that makes the work. I wanted to describe that in other materials, and so I began casting, but concrete, it just something felt more finalized to me. And there, like clay, it has this sort of, it's sort of a powder, and then it's sort of a liquid, and then it's sort of a solid, and you can dye it, and it also has a kind of ordinary quality and I like that kind of everyday relationship. It's not particularly spectacular, or I've been making these large molds where I'm using a lot of raw clay. And so the raw clay, it captures my handwork still, but I'm able to kind of capture that handwork in concrete because it kind of captures the inverse of the marks that I've made. Again, a little bit unpredictable, definitely very heavy. And so there is this kind of quality about objects in terms of their presence and scale or color, or I want to make work that is more than myself. And so that kind of level of making work that I need assistance with, there's a kind of collaborative quality to that, but then also it's, I'm sure, a bit of ego and a bit of what can be done. But I think I'm always trying to ask, like, what can I do with what I have, and how can I push the work further? But you can't really have an embodied knowledge of those answers to questions without actually doing it. So for me to engage in the work, it's a way of kind of putting a physical answer to those questions.
I'm excited to see what this looks like. And I guess maybe it's worth explaining for a moment that like you've got this giant piece of concrete that you have no idea what it's going to look like.
Yeah, so I made this 6-foot diameter circle, this sort of disc, and then with my fingers I kind of carved out a spiral that's from the inner area of the clay, and so then I've poured a lot of concrete into that. I'm interested in a kind of iconography of shapes and designs that are very elemental. I think that's what keeps drawing me back to the vessel, or very kind of like the intent and the ritual and the object and this form that has so much significance. And then there's the kind of almost the activation of that spell, that significance throughout time, and the kind of how it gets changed and altered by weather. I would love my work to be, there's something that interests me in the patina of work, or the patina that comes from use. And I think that use or that engagement is kind of anti-superficial or anti-sterile glamour that we're so kind of indoctrinated every day with. So to make work out of concrete that signifies sort of elemental forms is a way of kind of engaging with fundamental quality of human experience.
I'm really excited to see what it looks like. I think maybe I'm projecting too much, but like based on this conversation, the idea of like the body and performance and the material of clay is going to just reveal itself in a very different, outwardly facing way, right? Like the fact that you're like taking this kind of from mold making to casting, you're then seeing the reveal of that. I think has potential of being like really exciting within at least like the language I think that we've been communicating today.
Yeah, and there's something about that revealing that to me, also as a maker, it's like there needs to be a level of a certain kind of joy within the experience, or like a playfulness, or like what's the pleasure in it. I don't want to there's what's the effort of your labor and going through the process and doing the work and the calculations and taking those risks, but then also like what's the pleasure of the experience. And part of the pleasure for me is engaging in a way where I don't exactly know what is going to happen.
Yeah.
Because the more you repeat an action, the more you know, and so the more then you have to
Change.
change. So that's what I'm interested in. Particularly.
Awesome. I think that's such a good place to leave it.
Super, yes. Thank you so much for these great questions and this conversation.
It's been a joy. It's been really, really great to see you again.
You too.
Hey, it was nice to see you too. They always forget that I'm here. Nice job. That was really great. Thank you, Dove. It was really cool to hear your perspective since leaving and having time to process your time here at Vermont Studio Center. Yeah, it was pretty great. And now we have a book review from a former resident writer. Molly, are you ready?
Hi everyone, so I am here with author Robert Miltner today, and I would like to just give a little review of his new book, Triptych. So this is a completely unbiased review of this new book. So I'm going to specifically talk about Robert's section, which is called Orpheus and Echo, and this is an ancient story that, some of us have heard before, but this is a retelling of this classical tale. So this is coming out in May from Etruscan Press. This is a unique 3 books in 1 collection. But what Robert's section really talks about is the relationship between writers and artists and their inspiration. And what he does that's really fun is he time travels between classical Greece and contemporary America. So anyway, I really appreciate you listening to this completely unbiased review of his work, and I would highly recommend this book.
And of course, we always love to end with Sarah with the weather, since our weather is so different than your weather. Sarah? Sarah? Okay, well that's it for today. Until next time, and yeah, thanks for joining us. Just keep going back to our website. We have alumni features. We're digging into the archives for some of our visiting artist talks. We are updating constantly with resources that are out there. So yeah, right here, or right here. Maybe it's right here. I think it's up here this time. Yeah. Okay. See you next time. Have a good week.